Got a new plugin today from Waves. This is the Waves Space Rider. My friends at Waves were kind enough to send this over early for me to play around and experiment with it and make a little video for you guys. The plugin is not out as I'm filming this. I'm filming this probably a couple of weeks before it actually comes out. I think I have the final release candidate, but there might be some changes between the version I've got and what is actually released. So keep that in mind. It might be just, there's more presets in it or something like that, but something to keep in mind. This is not a sponsored video. Waves is not paying me to do this. I do want to mention that I am on the Waves artist roster and I'm an ambassador for Waves, and there are affiliate links below, but all the opinions here, this is all going to be just me. So let's take a look at Space Rider. So on the surface, kind of a multi-effects plugin. We've got a chorus, a delay, and a reverb here, and these processes are all running in parallel, but we can also feed them into each other from left to right. So we can feed the chorus into the delay and then the delay into the reverb if we would like. These effects sound good. There's got a couple of different flavors of chorus. The cool thing on the delay that I like is they have this offset feature here so that you can set one side of your delay to be a little different time. So you can have a little bit of an offset between the left and the right. It's a great little mixing trick. I really wish they would add that into H delay, because that would just make H delay awesome for me. I love H delay, but that's like the missing thing for me in H delay. But anyways, that left and right offset is pretty nice. Other than that, it's pretty simple. These are pretty simple effects controls, which I kind of like because there's not a lot of stuff to have to figure out. There's two different types of reverb here. We've got this one space and the plate. I kind of like the way the space one is. I guess it's sort of a hall type sound. The plate, it's fine. I mean, their effects, they're fine. The effects in here, to me, is not the big selling point. I mean, it is an effects plugin, but the big thing with this plugin to me is the kind of rider functionality that they describe. And what it really gives us the ability to do is to have the plugin move through different settings depending on what's coming into the plugin. And I don't know if that really explains it right. Maybe the Waves guys are explaining this in a much better way that makes a lot more sense. But I know initially for me, I didn't quite get this until I started playing around with it. And then I started thinking about what kinds of different things I can do with this, because this rider functionality, it just opens up a lot of different things, and hopefully things that you guys will think of that I haven't even thought of before. So something I want to mention in this before we really dig in on this is some of the presets that are in here, they're kind of boring to me. They're not taking advantage of the rider functionality. And while some of them sound fine on their own, like to not use the rider in here, it's like you're missing out. That's the whole gist of this. If you are playing around with the presets, one of the things you're going to want to adjust is this sensitivity control, because the sensitivity control is sort of a threshold control to control how it moves between the sort of A or alpha setting and the B or beta setting on here. And, you can manually move this and you can manually automate it if you want. But I think in a lot of cases, and maybe most cases, you're going to be turning on the auto functionality and then adjusting the sensitivity to have it move between the two settings. So let's just look at some examples of how I've played around with this and used this, and hopefully you will come up with even better ways of doing this, because, you know, the sky is the limit in terms of some of this, I guess. So let's take a look. So the first place I started thinking about this was for vocals, and what the riding ability here gives me the ability to do is when the vocal is singing, I can turn down the reverb time. I can turn down the delay feedback. I mean, really, just about any parameter on here is automatable for this riding. Everything from like the mix knob, the wet dry knob, the outputs, the input levels, which control how much is going into each of these effects, the left right offset, the modulation, feedback time. Like, you can set all of these to sort of modulate. And if you control click on the parameter, if you control click on the parameter, you can control which direction it goes. So you can have values going in inverse directions relative to other things that you have changing. One of the things with the controls on this plugin, in terms of the rider functionality, they're not as intuitive to get set up as I wish they were. And I'll just give you some pointers. First of all, you have to be in either the A or the B mode. You have to have one of those clicked to adjust it in the first place. So if I click on the A, now I can grab this mod control, and what it's going to do is it's going to set a range so that when it goes from the A to the B, it's going to move there. Now, if I want those to go in a different direction, I can control click on that strip there. But you have to click right on that. If I click here, it doesn't do it. It's got to be right on there. And you can adjust the ends of it if you want, but it's not, like, it's a little finicky for me on my machine. And if you grab in the middle, you can rotate it around. So just something to kind of be aware of. It's not necessarily always the most intuitive, and I feel like it's a little finicky clicking on some places in the plugin. Maybe this is something that they will adjust and tweak before it comes out, but on the version I've got, that's one of the things I wish that was a little more intuitive. But let's take a look at this vocal. As I was mentioning, one of the first things I was thinking was, oh, you can have this so it will kind of duck the reverb length in a way when the vocal is singing, and pull back on the feedback so that when they stop singing, it will open up and you can get more of that reverb. So you can get someone a little more kind of closer to you when they're singing, and then they like go back. So I'll just play a little bit of this with it on.
He's overcoming every grave, overwhelming all the shame. It's overflowing.
So if I turn off the auto, and just, this is what it would be without that riding feature.
He's overcoming every grave, overwhelming all the shame. It's overflowing.
That tail just kind of goes, but if I turn it on,
he's overcoming every grave, overwhelming all the shame. It's overflowing, it's overflowing. Our God is love.
Kind of cleans him up and dries him up when he's actually singing so that you can understand it, but then you still get that sense of reverb and space on the vocal. If I put it into context here.
He's overcoming every day, overwhelming all the shame. It's overflowing, it's overflowing. Our God
turn it off.
He's overcoming every day, overwhelming all our shame. It's overflowing, it's overflowing. Our God is love, overcoming every day, overwhelming all our shame. It's overflowing, it's overflowing.
So kind of a cool little technique to do with this. Kind of dries him up when he's singing, and then you still have the reverb. So that's one thing. Let's go look at a snare drum. So I have a snare drum here. You can see I created a little preset for this, and I set it for 74 beats per minute. And the reason I noted that there is because what I've done is I've timed the release on the rider here to really fit with the tempo of the song. One of the things I wish this had was I wish I could set the release and the attack values on the rider to a note value for, the music you're working on. I think that would be really cool. But as it stands, you can't, but I've got little, delay time charts so I could figure that out. Or you can just do it by feel even. I mean, really. And I'll just play a little bit of this and you can kind of hear what it does. If I turn off that auto functionality, here's what it is with it. So pretty long reverb. I turn this on and I can get some of that size, but it's not out of control this way. I can increase the length of the reverb. Maybe I want it to go longer when it hits. If we go up like around here, let's see what that does. Can play with the release on it. Check this out. I think that's kind of cool. I mean, I like the way that sounds right there. If I turn off the auto, though, now it's like it's not even doing anything. If I go to the other extreme, way too long. That's really just what it's doing on single hits, but check out what happens if there's something like a drum fill where it's going to ride it open a lot longer. A lot of times in a mix, one of the tricks you can kind of do is when you get a drum fill, you kind of ride your room tracks up a little bit. Well, with something like this, it will ride that up and open it up a little bit for those kind of bigger fills. All just part of the plugin. So something you can experiment with and play around with. Let's look at a piano. So this thing I dialed in on this, I was trying to do something else. And over the course of playing around with different settings, I started coming in on what I've got here. I was trying to see if I could get this to do sort of an automatic kind of tape flange sort of sound, but I couldn't quite get that to work. But I didn't let that stop me. I just kept going to see what would happen. So I started with just this delay, and I had this pretty loud initially. I was starting this on an acoustic guitar initially, but then I moved it to the piano, and I kind of liked what it was doing on this piano here. So First of all, before we get into any of this, here's just what the piano sounds like on its own. Pretty dry. There's just like a little pad probably mixed in with it. So I started with these settings. I was trying to just see if I could get it to make this tape flange thing, and it didn't work the way I wanted to, but I think there was still something there. So I have this inserted directly on the piano. I'm going to set the mix knob really high to begin with so you can kind of hear what it was doing. So we're at about a 50%, I guess a little bit more than that. But just to hear some of this, and it's going to sound a little weird. Right? On its own, probably wouldn't want to use that. But if I turn this down, check out what happens. I'll go back and forth between the wet and the dry. So we'll start with dry. I kind of like how that gives it a little bit of a space. It feels like it's in a space. It adds some, I hate using that word, depth. But to me, it makes it feel a little more three-dimensional turning this on. Then I thought, well, what happens if I put some reverb onto it? So I'm going to turn the mix knob up again. And to do this, I'm not using the input into the reverb section. I'm feeding the delay into the reverb. So I'll turn it all down, and here's what happens when I do this. So too much on its own, but again, if I turn that mix knob down, that versus just dry with everything off. To me, with Space Rider going on it, it's got a little more of that three-dimensionality to it. But, even beyond that, to me, it is just a little more of an interesting sound. And it's not a crazy departure from where it was, but it's a little more interesting. And the thing that I kind of like with this plugin is you have the ability to really kind of customize things on a per song basis, because the way that this plugin behaves is going to be entirely dependent on how this riding happens. And the way that riding happens is entirely dependent on the performance that's feeding into it. I kind of wish you could sidechain this to an external source, because I think that would be really interesting to be able to have some other source riding the effects sometimes. But as it stands, I think there are a lot of creative things you could do with this plugin because of having that kind of functionality. And I'm going to keep playing with this and seeing what I like using it. I think this might be something really cool for me to use in a live scenario because it has the simpler controls on all of the effects, but also, some of the venues I work in sometimes, they're just caves. And to be able to have this kind of control on the effects, I think that might come in pretty handy for some things. So that's the Wave Space Rider. Have you tried it? You can demo it through Waves. If you've played with it, I'd love to know. What do you think? What did you come up with? What kinds of things are you putting it on? What do you like modulating? Please let me know down in the comments. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.